So we have with us this morning Dr. Larry Hinzman. Dr. Hinzman is a professor of civil and environmental engineering at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. He currently serves as UAF Vice Chancellor of Research and previously served as Director of International Arctic Research. Professor Hinzman's primary research interest involves permafrost hydrology. He has conducted hydrological and meteorological studies in the Alaska Arctic in the last 25 years, while frequently collaborating on contemporary research in Russia and the Canadian Arctic. His research efforts have involved characterizing and quantifying hydrological processes and their interdependence with the climate and ecological dynamics. Okay, well, that's about enough of that. Larry, the floor is yours.
It's kind of funny, actually. I don't know where that bio came from. It's like, because it's old. I've been doing this work for 35 years, so, so at least 10 years old. So yeah, I came up here in 1981. Can people online hear okay? Do we know?
They've been muted.
Okay. So I came up here in 1981. I was going to school at Purdue, and I finished up there, and I wanted to take a break, and I had a job in Texas, but I hitchhiked up here on vacation. I was going to spend a month up here, and I never left. I've been here for, 37 years, and it's really worked out well for me. I think as far as just came up, and I grown up in South Dakota, and when I got here, I just never seen so many shades of green. And South Dakota is yellow or brown, and it was just amazing. And so it's been a wonderful place for me to do work all these years, and that there was just so many research questions to address. So I've been really, really fortunate. I worked in Anchorage for the first 6 months, and I worked for the summer. I was working for a gold prospector the first summer and did pretty well. And then that winter I almost starved to death. I finally got a job working at Flying Tigers, loading freight on airplanes from midnight until 4 o'clock in the morning for $5 an hour. So I was living in Anchorage for most of the winter on $20 a day. And then in April I saw a job at the university where the Ag Experiment Station, where Steve Sparrow and Charlie Knight wanted to hire somebody. And so I called them up and I told them about all my experience and all my degrees and everything I'd done, and I managed all these field crews at the ag farm at Purdue, and I was really just made for that job. And I had degrees in agronomy and soil science and chemistry, and but I said, well, really, we just want a big dumb guy that knows how to weld. And I said, I'm your man. So I've been there ever since.
So you learned how to weld?
No, I never did learn how to weld. I still don't know how to weld.
By the way, Doc, because Jim looked at me funny, I pulled that resume off of the website. So.
Yeah, I know you did. I tracked it down. It's on the president's website.
Oh, okay.
So I was wondering, so I did a Google search on that sentence. So I apologize to you about that. Anyway, but I fixed that sentence.
Oh, okay.
Thank you for that. Anyway, yeah. So so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to give a real broad overview of a lot of our research. Maybe I'll just talk for a little bit about the way our research is funded. So we do, it depends, there's 9 different ways you can calculate your research expenditures. We don't count how much money we bring in, we count how much money we spend, because proposals come in, in January, they come in December, and it's just hard to quantify how much research you're doing per year. But if you just count, from beginning of the fiscal year to the end of the fiscal year, and count how much you spend, you can compare year to year to year, and get a real good solid estimate of exactly how much work you're doing. And there's lots of different ways you calculate that. Depends on who you're calculating it for. And the way I like to count it is just how much money we're spending on research grants, wherever they come from. And Bob knows all this better than I do, I'm sure. Anyway, so we do about between 100 in the last few years. We've been doing about between 103 and 106 million in research grants. if you take all the research activities, which includes the money we get from the state, we do about 160 in research. And so see this big difference depending on how you calculate it. So we've lost a lot of people in the last couple of years, but our research has only gone down about 2% in the last few years. And so we're still, research is doing well. I mean, as far as we're doing as well as we've ever done. I think in a lot of it, our funding's really been cut, but the researchers are really scrambling and they've really stepped up to it. And so they're doing really, really well. I'm really pleased with how well they are performing. But if you go up there, you know, any night of the week, you go up there on Christmas Eve and you'll still see cars in the parking lot of people working away. So it's, they're pretty motivated. So one thing that's we've gotten a lot in the last couple of years is that people say, you know, we've been, it doesn't hurt to cut research because we're bringing in so much money, we can use that. But essentially, it's just like any other business. It takes money to make money. And we can't use the money from federal grants to write proposals. And so, or we can't use the money from federal grants to do, just general services that are required for all grants, you know, as far as a lot of that thing. So we have to have the state funding to enable us to get the grant money. And so we depending on which institute we're talking about, the amount of money we bring in to the money we get from the state varies between 4 to 1 and 7 to 1. Or 10, actually, the GI some years has been 10 to 1. So it's a pretty good return on investment for the state as far as how much money we bring in versus how much we get from the state. And so that most of that money, by far, you know, the majority of that money actually gets spent within the state, Eric. And a lot of it actually gets spent in Fairbanks. And so it's pays mortgages, it buys lumber, it buys gasoline, and so it's the money just reverberates around the state. And so there have been estimates years ago. Somebody did a study on the reverberation of the money brought into the state and how it circulates around the economy. But I don't know. We haven't done that recently. So I'm just going to just blast through just to give you a broad range of some of the scope that we do. And I guess my point in all this is that most of the work that we do actually has a real pragmatic or practical value for Alaska. So we, Harry knows this and many others. I've been down to Juneau a lot, and I ask the legislators what their research questions are. What do they need? What do they want us to do? And we ask that of everybody. And that it's easier for us to get work funded. It's easier for us to get projects funded if there's a driving need for it, and especially if there's some kind of documented need that we can point to that says this work needs to be done. That really helps us a lot. So it's easier for us to get funding if we can take on Alaska's projects much easier if there's direction and an urgent need for it. And so this is just one project that we got funded through NSF a couple of years ago, and it's called Microfuse. This was the NSF project, and so it's the Food, Energy, Water Nexus. And so it had to be projects where all three of them came together. You can imagine lots of projects where, you know, water and energy are related. You know, that's easy to think about too. There's a lot of projects where energy and food are connected, or water and food. But to get all three of them and to address the question where all three of them come together on one project, it's a lot harder actually. And so we have 3 projects. One, they're listing in Tanana, Kagananik, and Cordova, where we're doing various projects. And mainly, I guess what it is trying to reduce the energy cost to process water, and then how that water is used for food or something in those relations. But to try and get them all 3 to come together. So one of them is related to reducing energy costs to create ice, which is then used to package fish. You know, so it's all interconnected. But there's a lot of projects out there. You just got to think about it for a bit. This is a project we're doing up on the North Slope, where it's trying to get out some of the heavy oil. And so Brett knows a lot more about this than I do. I can talk about this slide, but it's actually, were you working on this, Brett? You want to explain for me?
Essentially, Polymer Flood is an enhanced oil recovery method that we're trying out for heavy oil for the very first time. Polymer floods use routinely in lighter oils, so there's nothing novel about that aspect of it, but it's never been used in heavy oil, primarily because in the lower 48 we have thermal recovery methods that aren't available here. never been tried here because polymer is a very viscous, heavy product to be pushing down hole to push the oil out. So there was always this fear that we would cause lots of damage to the reservoir. This project has de-risked it actually. So even though we're still a couple of years from having the pore volumes filled with the polymer like we want, so that we can really assess its value as an enhanced oil recovery method, we have demonstrated that you can inject it without causing harm. And so already we've heard informally that I&E is on our heels and has just made a big order for polymer themselves. And ConocoPhillips calls about every month or so and wants an update. They're very eager to kind of adopt it too. So it could be a game changer.
What's the transportation supply chain for that?
For the polymer?
Yeah.
That's really funny.
He already knows the answer. That's a big question.
He probably does, yeah. It's manufactured primarily in the Gulf Coast region, but because of the Jones Act, we can't afford to bring it up here in Alaska, so the company has licensed it out to Russia or China, and we actually bring it over from Russia or China because it's cheaper to do it that way. I don't know if we can talk about another project that I have, but we've looked at using that other project to maybe spin off and manufacture that polymer locally. I don't know that we can. In fact, I'm pretty pessimistic that that would ever work, but we're trying. We should have the building blocks here to do it. We just got to put it together and make it a little harder. And we got to see that the market pull is there. You know, it's if you build a polymer plant like that, it's going to be a big investment. It's going to be like building another refinery. That's the market. That's the supply chain. They've licensed it to Russia and China because it's way cheaper. But it'd be nice to have it from the Gulf.
That actually reminds me of another. So Brett used to work for the Department of Energy, and he actually funded a project that we did up on the North Slope. And I guess the reason I'm bringing this up is, you know, these projects, we bring in external money, but they benefit the state of Alaska. And so we had a project years ago where the oil industry used, well, they still do, pump water out of these little tundra lakes and then build the ice roads with. And they were being sued, DNR, it's, State Department of Natural Resources, was being sued by one of the local environmental groups because they said that taking the water out of those lakes had a adverse environmental impact on the lakes. And so we wrote a proposal through one of Brent's offices to the Department of Energy. We got that funded, and what we did is we looked at the just the dynamics of pumping the water out of these lakes, and we demonstrated that so the rule was that they could only take 15% of the liquid water, or 15% of the water that existed after the maximum ice was formed. And so the ice, the maximum ice was estimated at 7 feet. It gets really thick up there. And so they could only take 15% of the water that was left. And those are pretty shallow lakes, so that's not very much water. And what we did is we demonstrated that there was no, the water would, the way it was freeze, the lakes are shaped like this. And so it would freeze solid to the bottom all the way around the outside of the lake. And there was no biologic impact from taking that ice on the outside of the lake. And so that increased the amount of water that the oil companies could use tremendously. And they could just ship out that ice and then lay down the ice chunks. And so that made the construction of the ice roads much faster. And then they had to spray the water on to bind it all together. And we also then demonstrated that those lakes, essentially, when the spring melt occurs, essentially it's like flushing a toilet. Every bit of the water is completely replaced. And so there's no accumulation of effects from one year to the next. And so essentially we saved the oil companies just, countless millions of dollars per year in the way that they could construct the lakes. And so, that also gave DNR some ability to regulate it better. And again, it was just a good service to the state, I think.
Just to add to that technique that you demonstrated there, that was part of the project, that sped up ice road building. Yeah, if it takes you 20 days to build an ice road, now it takes you, 15 days. That's money saved and more time drilling.
So I guess the other thing is so like I was saying, we bring in on average about we get a return on investment of about 7 to 1, but that doesn't include the value of the research or the consequences or the benefits of the research itself. So that goes far beyond that 7 to 1. So the Arctic Domain Awareness Center, this is a center that It's been open for about 7 years, but for the first 3 years, it kind of floundered. And we took over, UAF became very strongly involved in it. It's primarily down in Anchorage. UAF became strongly involved about 4 years ago, and it's doing pretty well now. And so actually, it's doing phenomenally well. So it's the Department of Homeland Security, they're really a tough agency to work for. And for the first 3 years, we talked to them almost 3 times a week, and they'd always say, well, that's fine, but we can always kill you tomorrow. And so we're doing really, really well now. So they're for the first time, we're the first center that's actually going to be just renewed without going through all the review processes. So the only client is the Coast Guard. So what we do is every project we propose the projects to the Coast Guard, and they decide if they want to do it or not. And then every project we have has a Coast Guard champion, essentially, and it's that person's job to take it from the research into operations. And so every project we do is going into operations. And the Coast Guard has been really happy as far as we've reduced a lot of their risks that they're facing. We're taking on a lot of projects, like if a cruise ship gets stuck in the ice or is sinking, how do you get 5,000 people off quickly? What do you do with them? Just things like that. These big problems for the Coast Guard to work in the Arctic. And so it's going phenomenally well. I'm really, really happy with that. This is another project. Brent, did you work on this one? So this is out of UAA and UAF, but it's again. So Mike probably knows more about this than I do, but it's working to get for net zero energy buildings, and so it's working with the engineering program in Anchorage and the engineering program up here, and it's just looking at alternative energy methods. And so looking at ground heat pumps, looking at solar, and trying to merge all these energy technologies together. And it also has a great amount to do with just cold climate housing construction, making buildings more efficient, more effective for working in Alaska. So this is something that we're going to have to go with more and more and more, and I think it's becoming more practical for us and more cost effective. Study of mechanical properties of frozen soils. This is a biggie for us in that you probably noticed that when I moved up here 30 years ago, our roads would last about 7 years before we had to rebuild them. And Goldstream Road now it was rebuilt 4 years ago, and it's already going to pieces. So the problem is, as far as whatever people think about climate change, the soils are warming up here, the climate's warming, and so it's getting harder and harder and harder for us to maintain these roads. And so we've got to come up with different techniques, and this is just part of the basic science that needs to go into that. And another really good example of a project that we did years ago, it didn't cost very much. DOT hired us, and it was only give us like $15,000. And we looked at the unfrozen water content in soil under roads in the springtime, and we showed how much water there was under those roads, and then the deformation on the roads. And so what happens is in the springtime, when the snow melts, the roads warm up faster, and they have a huge amount of water in them. And this DOT used to not push the snow off the side of the roads, so it was still frozen on the sides. And so that water was just trapped. And so it was just like driving over a sponge. And so those roads would really deform and just get destroyed. And that study convinced the DOT that they should, in the springtime, before the snow melts, you got to push the snow away from the sides of the road so that the water can drain out. And that's really extended the life of the roads. And so again, there was a $15,000 study that has just, we've been using it ever since for the last 30 years or whatever, 20 years, and we've been moving that snow away.
What are we looking at there? Are those core samples?
Those are core samples. That's just called triaxial strain cell. Triaxial strain cell, as far as just looking at the distribution of stresses in the core. Anyway, what's going on? So this is another interesting project we have. So you've probably heard about this a lot. This is actually one of the really biggest, surprisingly, the biggest projects that we have, as far as not in big in terms of money, big in terms of manpower, but just big in terms of potential implications for society in general. in that ground squirrels are the only animal, the only mammal whose body temperature can go below zero, go below freezing, go below 0 degrees Celsius, go below freezing. And what we're learning from that is just trying to figure out what processes that the squirrel has that can do that, and then trying to take that and create drugs that we can use on people, so that if we have heart attack victims or some other traumatic injury, we can put a human essentially into a stasis that would shut them down, so to prevent brain injury, so we could transport them to a hospital or away from a battlefield so that they can get treatment. So the implications of this are just huge. So this is work that we've been doing for just about 5 years, but God, the potential is just amazing.
Is this a continuation of the Burt Boyer and originally Kelly Drew's?
This is actually Kelly Drew's project, yeah.
Okay.
So
The American Heart Association was involved in some of the early funding of that.
Yeah. And Brian Barnes, and we've got a lot of people that are working on that. This is really significant work. That's really great stuff. So we're also working to expand the commercial fishing, I guess, as far as commercial marine environment, mariculture work, to do kelp harvesting. So we're looking at a lot of different things. One of the things that we've been looking at is using these carbon fiber strips, essentially where you seed carbon fiber strips and then just let them go, and let them go down the coastline, down past the Gulf of Alaska, down through California, and catch them in California and harvest them there. And so you're essentially just, they're floating fields, essentially, for looking at kelp harvest. And so it's kind of a cool way. So anyway, this is we've got a big issue. I mean, the global society has a huge issue as far as how we're going to feed 8 billion people or 9 billion people in the future. And so we've got to start coming up with new innovative ways of getting food. So this is looking very, very positive. So I've got a lot of slides like this, and I don't have to go through all of them, so we can stop anytime, or if there's anything you want to talk about. You don't need to do all of them. This is College of Fisheries. This is a slide they gave me, and these are just all of their laboratories. And I guess what the point that the dean wanted to make when I had these is that each of these laboratories have an impact on their local area. And so this research is being distributed all around Alaska, and there are local benefits, but benefits to the state, but also benefits just to the local communities. And so a lot of the work that they're doing does have global impacts, but again, it's also really important locally. One of the things I guess I should mention is the Sea Grant was involved in both those last two slides. Sea Grant is really, it's part of our extension service. And so the Cooperative Extension Service, we have MAP agents, Marine Action Program, Marine Agents.
Advisory.
Marine Advisory, thank you. And so we have MAP agents in dozens of communities around the state, and those are really important and effective for us for helping the local communities utilize the ocean resources. And so we're really happy with those. Those are a really great group for us. College of Natural Science and Mathematics. Most of the research that I've shown you up to now has come out of the research institutes. But the university is divided into academic units and the research institutes. Our university is a little unusual in having these research institutes, these large research institutes. But all of our faculty, not all, most of our faculty in the academic side also do some research. And so the College of Natural Science and Mathematics, their faculty typically do about 3 months worth of research a year. And so this is just some of their projects that they've been doing. I think.
Larry, can you touch on on the last slide?
Oops. Let's see.
The preparing STEM teachers for Alaska. What are you guys doing to try to reach out and get more teachers in Alaska for the science programs?
So actually, we have I wish I would have touched up on this. So we have a program we're working on now. I'm trying to think of the name of that right now, where it's actually a statewide program. It's funded through Department of Education.
The Educators Rising?
Yes, yeah. And so that is really focused on preparing teachers in rural areas and in urban areas too. We also work in large communities, but preparing teachers to be more effective and to be essentially, if they can be more effective, they can be happier in their jobs and they can stay, and we can maintain the workforce longer. And so that's all part of it as far as making the teachers better in their jobs, making it better for the students, making it better for the teachers, making it better for the state.
Yeah, I went to an Educators Rising, the competition almost down in Juneau, and they showed a lot of their, the projects they've been working on, and it helped bring students in high school who wanted to be teachers into the program, so they had more of a running start sort of when they started college. That was excellent, so I'm glad to hear that's cool.
See, so all of you probably know more about some of these things than I do. So we have hundreds of projects going on. And this is one of them. And I got to admit, I'm not so familiar with Educators Rising. I know we have a lot of people working on it, and I think that the educating, making new teachers, educating teachers, part of the academics is important to us, but also the research is really a big deal for us too. So this is really kind of a cool program. So the coastal processes is a huge issue for Alaska, and that we're really got a lot of our coastal communities are really endangered. And so we're actually doing a lot of work right now trying to make our coastal regions more secure, less vulnerable to a lot of the conditions that they're facing. So one of the issues that we really haven't faced in this state is that we can't do our planning for the conditions that we're seeing now. We have to do our planning for the conditions that we're going to be facing in 30 years down the line. And so what this project is really doing is trying to help infrastructure anticipate what the conditions are going to be like, and then build appropriate infrastructure in appropriate places so that they're more stable in the future. And so there's a lot of components to this project. One of them is just distinguishing areas of stability from areas of vulnerability. Just so we try and invest in areas that are going to last, that are going to be stable, get into the future, and so that we're not building infrastructure that's going to be essentially destroyed in 10 years. And so we've got to look farther down the line and be smarter in where we make our investments. And then again, as far as giving engineers the tools they need to know what the conditions are going to be, that's actually a big research project. And this, surprisingly enough, a lot of this work is actually being funded by the Department of Defense. So they're really interested in future infrastructure. One of the things you've probably worked with the Environmental Atlas of Alaska. You ever worked with that? So the Environmental Atlas of Alaska came out in 1976, and that for years, that's what the Trans-Alaska Pipeline was built on. It's just using that environmental data, and this essentially is to take that type of technique, update it, and then project it into the future, so we know what soil temperatures are going to look like, we know what wind loads are going to be, we know what snow loads are going to be, and just kind of give us better information to do infrastructure development. The Alaska Native Language Center is really doing some great work on preserving local languages, indigenous languages. This is a big issue for us, and it's been a big problem for us for the last 30 years. The university has recognized this as an important issue, but it's good now that the nation is actually addressing this too, and so we're getting a lot more funding from national sources to address this preservation of language and try and get more courses in the schools so that local people can learn their native languages. And so this is a very, very successful program, and hopefully we can keep this going. This is funded from out of the National Science Foundation. This is really cool. You may have heard about this on the radio, or you may have seen this, but this is just some research that was published about a year ago, and this just got huge impacts throughout the United States, certainly, and actually around the world. And so what it does, it just made a little bit clearer about how the population of America through the Bering Land Bridge and down into the western United States, and it showed using genetics and using other tools, or more recent tools, to better understand where these people came from and what time and how it was populated. Most of the evidence of human population of North America was lost because people traveled along the coast, and then in the last 9,000 years, 10,000 years, the sea level has risen. And so we've lost most of the evidence as far as that goes. That was really a big deal. When I came up here in 30 years ago, we knew that the population in New Mexico and Arizona, they were existing about 16,000 years ago. But the earliest evidence of life in Alaska was only about 11,000 years ago. So there is still a lot of conflict, even 30 years ago, about how the North America was populated. And so this is really giving some solid evidence to that. It's really.
So is this based on his dig down there at Shaw Creek?
So yeah, so I guess my point for showing this one is just this is world-class research that's really getting huge impacts. As far as the economic benefits to Alaska, it's not so great, but just taking on some of the important scientific questions, it's really been a big impact. Ag and forestry work. So, like I said, when I came up here, I actually went to work on the ag experiment station, and my first project was trying to grow faba beans, trying to get some more crops that would work in Alaska. It didn't work out so well, but we have made some really great progress over the years. And so the USDA was really invested 30 years ago, and there was a lot of effort going into it. They pulled back a lot, so there's not so much agricultural work going on here, but we have made some really important progress in that we have developed varieties of barley that are really doing well up here. We've developed types of canola that are doing well. We've gotten patents on those. Another thing that we're doing actually that's I think I can announce this, is that we're actually working with, so we had a real large reindeer program out in the Seward Peninsula. And then not very long ago, about 10 years ago or less, the caribou migrated through the Seward Peninsula, and they just essentially wiped out the reindeer industry on the Seward Peninsula. What we're doing right now is we're working with Stevens Village to establish a reindeer industry in interior Alaska, Napa Delta. So it'll be all fenced in so that migrating caribou won't be able to steal the reindeer. And so hopefully we can, we're going to transfer the reindeer to, we've been working with them for the last few years. We're going to transfer the reindeer to them this summer. So it's,
Through Stevens Village?
No, it'll be owned and operated by Stevens Village, but the ranch, I guess we'll call it a ranch, will be in Delta. So anyway, I think that,
Do you all have anything to do, I understand there's an apple orchard in the community. Did you all have anything to do with helping make that happen? Maybe?
I don't know, there's a lot of things I don't know. Where's that at?
I don't know, but my kids went to it. It's something about
Hot Springs.
By Hot Springs? On the roof?
Yeah, I don't know. I know
For a
Don
long time.
Dinkel was doing a lot of research with apples years ago, and so there may be something that, like I said, there's a lot of research going on that I just don't know about. I'm not sure, but we did a lot of work on that years ago, and so maybe that's still some of the consequences for that playing out. Yeah, so this is actually one of the sad consequences of the budget cuts we're having, in that we're losing a lot of people, and so I can't imagine a university in Alaska without having a heavy natural resources component, because we are a natural resource state. We do have forestry management's a big deal for us, and so we're really concerned about the people we're losing and how we're going to maintain these programs. So right now we're going through these conversations about what we're going to do. So a lot of the people who are formerly in the School of Natural Resources and Environment have been transferred into the college, the NSM College of Natural Science and Mathematics. The research programs are being diminished, so it's a serious issue for us. So hopefully keep the good researchers going. Biomedical research. So this is actually something, this is I think our biggest bright spot on the horizon is health research, in that we get a lot of funding from the National Science Foundation. We do tremendously well with the National Science Foundation, NSF. We do really well with NASA. And actually NIH, the National Institute of Health, is one of our areas where we don't get that much money from, and they really want to give us a lot more money. We have a lot of more opportunities there than we can take advantage of. And the big thing is we just don't have the people to go after it. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to create new programs where we can actually gather a lot of that, more of that funds and help grow our research in that direction. We do have a few big programs that are doing phenomenally well. BLAST is one of them. BLAST is a program where the main purpose is to get indigenous peoples, children from indigenous communities to go into biomedical fields. So we're bringing them in early, working with them, trying to get them interested in medical science. Some of it's working well, but some of them just get interested in going to the university and they go off into engineering or biology or something else. That's good too. So, I mean, there's still a lot of benefits from it. So it's been a very successful program. The Center for Alaska Native Health Research, CANR, has been doing some really cool work with mainly diet and trying to work with obesity. And that's what this slide is about, as far as 51% of the Yupik children, Yupik 3-year-olds are obese. 51% of Yupik 3-year-olds are obese. And so that's essentially, it's a diet issue. And so we're really focused on that, trying to get people off to a healthier start. And so that impacts, so many aspects of their life, as far as it impacts diabetes, it impacts, other organ health. And so it's a big deal. Another project that we've started about a year ago, maybe you've heard about this, is One Health. So One Health is just, I was trying to put a slide in on that, but One Health is just the concept that the health of the environment affects the health of the animals, affects the community, affects the people, and so it's all connected together. And that is a very holistic perspective. But the other thing about it is, what that does is that concept lets us go to NIH to get funding for my environmental chemist. So it gives us, what we've been able to do is, using that concept of One Health, we've been able to get funding for people who are doing work with stellar sea lions, because people eat stellar sea lions at high concentrations of mercury. And so it's all tied up in that One Health concept. And so it allows us, I don't actually have many biomedical researchers, but we've got environmental researchers that are doing health-related research. And so it gives us another avenue to get research funded. And it's an important program for the state of Alaska. We've got a huge program right now with teen suicide. And that's a terrible, terrible problem for Alaska and Canada. And had good successes there, I think. We made some real good impacts there. We've got some good techniques, and so but that still remains a big problem for us. The Cooperative Fish and Wildlife Research Unit. This is a pretty cool unit for us in that this money all comes from the feds, all comes from the USGS. So the USGS actually supports fish and wildlife research. And so we've actually got several people. We've got one of the biggest cooperative fish and wildlife research units in the nation here in Alaska. And all this work, again, it tackles issues of local concern. And so it's good for the nation, and they've done some really, really cool work. These guys, we get a lot of funding, actually. It's the Cooperative Fish and Wildlife researchers get funding from Fish and Game to take on projects that are of concern to the Alaska Department of Fish and Game. And so that's, again, a place where we're addressing local issues. So this is my last slide. So the Geophysical Institute, I'm ending with this one because this is kind of where it all started. The GI was our first research institute. Started in 1946, so right after the World War II. The big issues in those days were actually communications, so global communications, and trying to communicate by radio to the lower 48. And researchers at the Geophysical Institute actually learned how to bounce radio waves off the ionosphere to enable global communications by radio. And that's where we really got the start. And so that those early successes really brought a lot of researchers to Alaska. So we had this huge confluence of researchers here in tiny little Fairbanks at that point. And that essentially initiated this major research powerhouse focused around the ionosphere and communications, and then it just kind of exploded from there. And then in the 1950s, the Institute of Arctic Biology got started. Then again, it brought in researchers from around the world and made a really strong research unit in biology. And then it just propagated from there. So that reputation that these early researchers created or established has really made it easier for our researchers to get the funding. The national program managers in NASA and NSF and NOAA, you know, they don't give us money because they get a good proposal. They fund projects based on the belief that you can do the work. And so they're stewards of the public money. And so you have to demonstrate, you have to prove the capability that you're going to deliver on the promise. And so the work that these guys started in the 40s and 50s have really enabled the successes that we're getting today. And so I guess I'll end there. Thanks.
All right. So do we have questions?
Sure, maybe start on this one. So is that general funds or total funds of 50 million?
Total.
I would think, but I guess,
Yeah.
okay.
Larry, the kind of, you know, what I would call the applied research, things like, you know, understanding that, you know, moving the snow off the side of the road, it's helped our highways and, you know, obviously lowered the cost of the DOT and benefited the last public. Those type of projects, you know, obviously help save the state money, but there, you know, there's many of them. I just use that for example. And yet, as we go through this debate of, you know, should the university be funded? At what level should it be funded? I don't hear that discussion. I haven't seen the university put out, you know, anything on that. You know, that it's not just the general funds that we put into the university. It's what we create, and we focused, you know, kind of on the jobs that, you know, like Steve Lundgren talks about. You know, I have 30 employees and 17 of them are university graduates, or, you know, something to that effect. But, you know, there's also the benefits of the applied research that directly impact Alaska. Why aren't we telling that story? Why aren't you telling that story?
I think I do. I mean,
Well, I understand you do, but where do I hear it?
yeah, I guess maybe not. I do. So I host, actually, Jim, we host 3 meetings with the legislators every year. So I do one in Fairbanks, one in Anchorage, and then one in Wasilla. That is the primary message, is just the pragmatic value of the research, the practical values that come out of it. So when I first took this job, I went out to see Senator Coghill, and he beat me up over that. You know, he said, "Why aren't you guys doing any practical research? You know, what you do anything for the state of Alaska?" And I said, "You know, we are." It's just that he did not know that. And so that's been the purpose of those legislative sessions, you know, the legislative education efforts ever since then. But maybe I'm not doing enough of them.
I know in health resources, we had one from the School of Fisheries talking about a lot of the work that's being done there and the impact on the economy that we saw. And then School of Engineering, director or dean over there.
So it could have been Doug Arian or Bill Schnabel.
Bill Schnabel, yeah, he came down and talked about all the work they're doing. The polymer enhanced oil recovery, he talked about a bit, and then Mike West came down and talked a lot on what those U.S. array sensors in the seismology department they're doing. Those were all really good for us to hear, and most were defended. But I mean, yeah, it's good to hear. And when we talked, it was getting the people who get the benefit of the research, the Steve Lundgrens, the VPs that hire all the Alaskans, getting them to talk about it. And we did hear from a fair number of them when we were down there. But yeah, you had talked about it. It's sometimes difficult to get the VPs and the oil companies and the mining companies to come and say, yes, we need these fundings, and that's something that we can probably all help with, lifting that here at home to help deliver that message too. And I know you guys have a really effective rally that got covered as well on the economic impact of the university, and that was well timed and good to see as well. But those people that get the benefit from the jobs, from the graduates, that really would help down there as well.
Well, you know, it's certainly all tied together. One of the things that, one of the boards that I serve on is the Governor's Aviation Advisory Board. You know, runways in rural Alaska, particularly in unstable areas, you know, where you know, there's no travel available. And the runways just go apart almost immediately after you spend $50 million building. You know, how do we build sustainable infrastructure in the state of Alaska that, you know, that is going to serve the people of Alaska? And one of the things that I think about serving on that board is that we have 250. Get transportation service. And why do us that live on the road system only, are we the only ones that should have transportation system, or should all of Alaskans?
You know, that's a really good point. I have two things to say about that, and that's so I get some grief because I'm always gone. I travel all the time. You know, you have to be out there getting the money back. And last week I was in Washington for the whole week, and what I was focused on was to get money for this problem is as far as maintaining stable infrastructure. It's going to last for, you know, for 100 years. It's really, really hard for us right now because the permafrost is going to continue to degrade, you know, and we've got to change our processes to deal with it. And so we've got to get more investment. That's going to take huge federal investment to come up with just better building techniques. But also, I remember years ago, so there was the Department of Transportation was realigning runways in these small rural communities, and they wouldn't realign a runway until they had 2 years of continuous wind data. And they'd hired a contractor to work in these villages, but the contractor would go in and put up the met station and then leave, and then the local kids would come out and just destroy the station, so we could never get any data. And so I went out to, they gave us a contract, and I went out and I spent like 3 days in these little communities, and I go to every single class and I talk about how, you know, how important it was to get a good runway, and that if their grandmother got sick, if an airplane couldn't get in here, then their grandmother may die. And these net stations ran for 2 years without a problem. You know, so you gotta come at it from the very bottom level. And so we created the data. We collected the data needed to align a dozen runways.
Other questions, comments?
Can you hear me?
I hear you. Yeah.
I'd like to ask a question. Is there any research in the use of high technology, including satellites, in the location and identification of mineral deposits?
Yes. So I'm trying to think. So we have a new sensor called a hyperspectral radiometer, and it collects reflected radiation in hundreds of different channel bands, and that actually has been useful for identifying reflectance characteristics, what the surface characteristics of the minerals are. So, for example, I'll just give you one real brief example of. We use this on the north slope of Alaska. I don't know if you've ever seen. This is not necessarily for mineral resources, but it's a good example of how that can work in that situation. In that, I don't know if you've ever seen these very large off-ice deposits. They're ice that accumulates over the winter. So what happens if you have a spring that's coming through the soil and it continues to flow? It's a groundwater spring, continues to flow all winter long, and so you can get these huge deposits of ice around that. And we use that hyperspectral radiometer to look at those fields. And what they showed is that when the water comes out of the ground and it goes up to the surface, it's carrying a lot of minerals. And then what happens when it freezes, the minerals get pushed out of the water and the ice freeze, and so those minerals get deposited on the surface. And using that hyperspectral radiometer, just using a combination of the bands, we could just see it just shined, the mineral depositions just shined in those, using that analysis. And what we were able to do is we were able to show that those flows from those groundwater springs have not really changed in the last 10,000 years. And what that did, that showed us that even though the climate is changing a lot, the flow from groundwater is not changing. And so that was really an important discovery with respect to understanding the hydrologic cycle, the large-scale hydrologic cycle of North America. And so that was really important work that we discovered with that hyperspectral radiometer. And so that hyperspectral radiometer can identify mineral resources on the surface. It can't go below the surface, but so far, the only thing we have for going below the surface is like ground penetrating radar or something else like that. But yeah, we do that kind of work.
Larry, Milt Wiltsey was doing a lot of work on characterization of mineral deposits.
Right. So Bob Shefchuk just mentioned that Milt Wiltsey. Yeah, he was formerly from DGGS, and he came to work at the university, and he was really interested in using remote sensing for identifying mineral deposits throughout the state, and so that's been important. So he has done some mapping, working with the Geographic Information Network of Alaska to map out mineral resources in the state. What are you going to say?
Well, I appreciate, the work that you're doing to try to get the word out. A lot of people do not realize or understand what is involved. What the university's working on with different projects. And of course, a lot of the research work you're able to get grants on. And of course, it does cost money. And the big problem there is the state there's been criticism of the state putting money into grants, but they help to generate revenues and provide jobs. And with this age of change, and of course we've always been in a state of continual change in Alaska. Of course, what's happening now may be happening at a more rapid rate than as previously, but it's important that you get the word out and try to go ahead and educate the public as to what the university is doing. It's a pretty frustrating time with lack of revenues. And,
the state is really changing rapidly, though. I'm just amazed at how fast our roads are degrading, how fast, how many more landslides we've gotten than we have in the past. I mean, there's some really dramatic changes occurring, and they are going to cost our state money. You know? And so we've got to be doing things smarter to try and one, minimize loss of infrastructure, but also make our infrastructure last longer.
Yeah.
There's a lot of work we need to do.
Well, we have to get a handle on what's happening and what's going to happen. We may not have any control over, but we need to be able to understand what's happening and what steps we can take to adjust to changing times. So it's a tough period, and appreciate the work the university's doing and trying to get the word out.
Yeah, we're excited. There's a lot more work to do.
A couple of slides back, you showed something about housing, increasing housing efficiency. Do you work at all with Cold Climate?
Oh yeah, yes, we have good relations with them. So.
You didn't mention it.
Yeah, I did mention them, but yeah, there's a lot of things we're doing, but I can't mention everything.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of good people down there doing some great work for the community, for the state. I'm really delighted that they decided to locate so close to the university. They're not actually part of the university, but they're right there.
Yeah.
Okay, anything else?
Maybe back on that early slide on food security and some of the research way back towards the beginning.
This one, huh?
Yeah, what the research, what's the timeline on, I don't know, I'm thinking about concrete products, when we can, when you could say to folks in rural Alaska, plant these seeds or use this process, or a lot of times research is you know, takes a while, and then other times, like the polymer stuff, that's more quick in it. So just give me a sense for.
You know, it's hard to say. So this is, it says it's a 3.5-year collaboration. You know, it is hard to say as far as when a product is going to come out. You know, in a lot of cases, you know, a lot of what we discover is, you know, this won't work. You know, but that's still valuable to know.
Sure.
So I don't know. It's really hard to put a, and like I said, we're doing so many different things, and so it's really hard to put down timelines. I guess I will say that, you know, we have hundreds of different projects going on all the time, and there's publications and results coming out, you know, weekly, and so there's good results coming out all the time. You know, and I just don't know, and I can't predict what results is going to come out of this one. I do think that this is primarily led by ACEP, the Alaska Center for Energy and Power. And again, Brent could probably talk more about this than I can. But I do think that they've really done some really great work in the last decade. And so I think there's a lot of good results that come out of it.
Well, all I can say about this one is that there's quite a bit of renewable power generation in these communities. I'm less sure about Tanana, but Con, Cordova. And in Cordova in particular, they had all this power produced at night that's hydroelectric, but they didn't have a use for it. So I suspect, because I was leaving ACEP about the time this was spinning up, I suspect that this is largely aimed at how do you use that excess energy when it's available to grow food or to, you know, how do you get some benefit out of it? That's what this was spinning up when I was leaving, but that would be knowing how they think that's probably.
The project, actually Mike probably knows more about this one. So the project in Tanana is about using biomass for energy, and actually I think it's run in the school there, isn't it? And I guess the important thing is it is an alternative energy that they're combining with diesel, but it's given a lot of local jobs as far as using that biomass to bring to the school to run it. So I mean, there's a lot of other spin-offs benefits.
With the Sustainability Commission, and two of our objectives are food security and energy conservation. Is there anybody at the university who could work specifically with the Sustainability Commission to help achieve those goals?
I'm sure there is. I guess I'd like to know a little bit more about what sustainability is such a broad concept. So I guess I'd like to know a little bit more about what you're focused on. Yeah, I mean, you're talking about, because there's food, energy, water, economics.
So if we had a question, could we bring it?
Bring it to me.
Okay.
And then
you could
I'll find out.
Tell me who to go to. Okay.
Yeah.
Follow up on Rick's question. Can you touch on what the your guys' IP department, your intellectual property department is doing, and how you're bringing some of these things to market and getting the researchers their patents?
Sure. So we've really expanded that effort a lot in the last few years. So we've got a patent attorney now. We've got actually it's a small staff, and we're really trying to move that forward, trying to get a lot of these products into licenses. And that in the past we've really focused on just getting disclosures, numbers of disclosures. Now we're actually focused on licenses, trying to get these discoveries partnered up with companies that can actually use them. And so, like, one good example is those biomedical outputs from that ground squirrel work. And so there's actually a small company that's been developed for that, just for that one purpose. And so they've got it's still pretty relatively small, but that could be a great example of an industry for Alaska. And that a lot of industries don't work well in Alaska just because, you know, they take, you know, large amounts of materials and large shipping costs. But that would be one that would work really well here, and that the materials shipped in, shipped out are not so substantial. So it could work really, really well in Fairbanks. And so there's things like that we're really trying to do market assessments on, and then trying to create business spin-offs from that. We've gotten several grants to really help us along with that. ACEP has got one that's from the Office of Naval Research, believe it or not, and just the purpose of it is just to help get spin-off company started in Alaska. So it's a statewide project.
Okay,
We,
thank you, Larry.
you want to ask if there's anyone online? Is any final questions?
Go ahead.
Is there anyone online who has any final questions? Okay, sounds like no, sir.
Okay, well, thanks everybody for your
Thank you,
interest.
Larry.
Thanks everybody for your support of the university. Appreciate it.
Okay, and just for everybody before they leave, next week we're going to have our follow-up on climate, global climate changing.
Who's the presenter?
It's Dr. Walsh is the primary speaker from the university, with I believe with some colleagues. I think it's going to be some other partners as well. I believe.
That would be appropriate if we do climate change.
Well, you take care.
Sure glad that we have that brain power on.
Oh, yeah.
It's a huge economic engine. It's a third.
All right, thanks a lot, everybody.
And our governor's giving it away.